Please join me in welcoming our next speaker, Patrick Sexton. It's like they don't exist.
John was one of our teacher candidates a few years back. He was a gay man. He wasn't in the closet, but he didn't make an issue of his sexual orientation. He was really focused on becoming the best teacher that he could be. And he was good. He built strong relationships with students, and his instructors felt that he was really accomplished. John wondered how, when, and if he should come out at school. After all, his mentor teacher illustrated his teaching with details about his life, with stories about his being a dad, and he told his middle schoolers about adventures he and his wife took. He brought himself to his teaching, and we work really explicitly with our candidates to help them understand that who they are and the unique things that they bring to the classroom impact their teaching. So John reached out to another teacher at the school that he knew was gay, asking how to approach coming out to his students. Don't do it. It turns out the teacher was out to only a few staff members and not at all to kids or to families. It's just not okay here. John sat with the struggle. Sometime later, John was sitting alone in his classroom grading papers. It was early, before homeroom. A few minutes went by, and the door to the classroom opened and closed. And Braden, an 8th grader that was in one of John's classrooms, had entered the room, and he looked upset. Braden made a beeline for John, picking up a wooden stick along the way. Braden leaned down to speak to John. "Are you a girl because I have long hair? Are you queer? What?" Braden raised the stick high and off to the right. "I said, are you a faggot?" Braden put the stick down. "I said," the door to the classroom opened, and the mentor teacher walked in. He saw the scene. Braden received in-school suspension, and he and his family agreed to participate in a restorative justice process. John agreed as well. He was really focused on supporting students' learning. We discussed the restorative justice process with John and his mentor, and both of them felt that this was really the most likely way that Braden was going to learn from what had happened, and to understand that the school would not tolerate that kind of behavior based on someone's perceived or actual sexual orientation. After all, it was in the school district's policies. The restorative justice process would start with a short conversation between the school leaders and the teaching team. About 15 minutes later, Braden and his family would join them. The school leaders laid out how they would engage Braden in understanding the violence inherent in raising a weapon, a wooden stick, threateningly above a teacher, and how he would make amends for those actions. John piped up. "And for involving questions about my sexual orientation in that behavior." Silence. "And for using the word faggot?" asked John's mentor, "right?" It turns out the school leaders didn't think it was a good idea to bring up issues of sexual identity in the restorative justice process. They thought that it would be good enough to leave the process at dealing with a weapon, because that was the actual offense, right? No mention. No mention. No mention. The next day, we moved John from his placement. I want you to think back to your middle and high school days. Do you recall ever hearing about a queer person, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, or otherwise queer person in school? I won't ask you to raise your hands. If you're anything like the 80% of queer students polled by the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network in 2016, you cannot recall ever experiencing queer inclusive curriculum at school. Not a book, not a historical text, not a classroom discussion, nothing. No mention. Now I want you to think back and think about hearing about straight people in your middle and high school days. Anyone who identified as a hetero husband or wife, a straight girlfriend or boyfriend, anyone whose gender or sexual orientation was just assumed to be straight, heteronormal. Didn't take you long, did it? Now I want you to think about this phrase, and what if it were flipped? What about a world in which this phrase were flipped and 80% of the students experienced queer inclusive curriculum? What might that do to the norms and expectations in our schools and communities? What might that do to the FBI data that tells us that crimes against LGBTQ people are on the rise? And that queer people are the most likely targets of hate crimes in America? I can't say that mentioning queer people in a positive way at school would have kept Braden from threatening John, but I do know that Braden lost an opportunity to learn that day. The equity work that we do with our candidates in our teacher education programs is explicitly intersectional, and queer people are included in that work. And our college is committed to contributing to more socially just and equitable education systems. And we got a lot of work to do, because education systems in which the existence of queer people is never acknowledged is missing some crucial social justice components. Thank you.